So I'd really like to thank Samantha for all her help and My Catholic Doctor for allowing me to do this presentation. So I'm a family physician outside of Burlington, Vermont. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, went to Notre Dame, and then went to medical school in Philadelphia where I met my wife, and moved up here to finish training and never left. And so it's a great place to raise 4 kids and a few more sheep than that. But I really started looking at this topic a number of years ago when I was tasked in our medical group at the University of Vermont to look at provider well-being for physicians and other clinicians within our medical group. And at the time, there was data emerging that really highlighted what a big problem this was, particularly for clinicians. And as I learned more about the whole topic, there are a couple things that emerged. One of them is this is not unique problem for physicians, though some of the data are. So there's some physician-specific things that we certainly have been doing for it. But so much of this is relevant to all of us in our day-to-day lives, whether it be parenting, religious life, married life, wherever we are. It doesn't have to be in as a physician or even in gainful employment. But the other thing that I experienced as I dove deeper into how we're going to solve some of these issues is that we're leaving something on the table. So we're looking at all these tools on how we are going to help our clinicians really through a very stressful time in medicine, and that was before the pandemic. Right. And so now we've hit the pandemic, and physician suicide rates are measurably higher than that of other people. How are we going to help people through this? And we were leaving, in my mind, what was the most powerful tool on the table. And that's the Christ-centered piece, and that's what I want to get to at the end, at the last third of the talk. Normally, right now, we would talk about why we need to talk about the topic we're presenting tonight. I think most of us probably understand why we need to talk about this topic, stress, anxiety, and feeling overwhelmed, because you don't have to turn in many directions to find that. And again, it's not just with my fellow clinicians. So what are our objectives for tonight? I'm going to go through these briefly. Some of this might sound like, I was going to say like Greek to you, and I was reading the word amygdala. In fact, there is some Greek on here, so that's okay. We'll get to the details of this, but just for an outline, the first thing we would do is understand the relationship between the amygdala, the frontal lobe, and stress response. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is explore 3 behavioral techniques we can use for promoting a task positive, that's the frontal lobe driven stress response, versus the risk response or amygdala driven stress response. And then finally, and this is the new part, this is the part that was fun for me to do for My Catholic Doctor, was to really contemplate, what does scripture have to add to this? And it turns out it's quite a bit. A few caveats, so I do this as part of my work, usually in 2 to 3 hour or half-day workshops. I've even seen it done as a 2-day workshop. So we are going to whet our appetites, and if you left feeling like we've covered it all, then I've done a bad job. I'll put it that way. So there's a lot more to get to. Samantha is going to share my email address at the end, but if you want to reach out to me, it's james.uliger@mycatholicdoctor.com. But we'll review that again at the end. The other thing is, this is for mild to moderate stress and anxiety. So one thing we won't be discussing is, for example, indications for medication, because that's a lot of what I do as a physician is I prescribe medication and what situation we might do it in. We can talk about that at the questions at the end, and I'd be happy to talk about that if people are interested. The other thing is complex situations, especially where there's a history of trauma. Some of these techniques can be very good in that setting, but not always. And so, as the third point indicates, this is nothing that would substitute for a therapeutic relationship with a medical or mental health professional. The other thing I'm going to ask for your patience in is, these examples are taken from what I know, and the task I'll set to you all is to think about how they apply to your situation. And most of the talk was designed with my clinical colleagues in mind. But what's interesting, as a lot of my clinical colleagues have gone through the training, the first place they use this is in the non-clinical aspects of their lives. So they'll be like, oh, I tried that in my marriage. It worked great. A lot less stress. And he said, oh, okay, now the goal is to move it into the clinical realm. So there's nothing here, even though I might be using clinical examples, it's very applicable to other places in our lives. So, and I would be disingenuous if I was talking about things that I wasn't familiar with. And that's certainly what I'm familiar with. So let's go back to that objectives. The first one is to understand the relationship between the amygdala and the frontal lobe in the stress response. So here we are, the frontal lobe and the amygdala, literally a tale of two brains, or two different spots in the brain. So the amygdala, or let's start with the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the highly evolved frontal portion of our brain that arguably makes us uniquely human. It's made for rational thought, and we need access to it for the most complex tasks that we execute. The amygdala, by contrast, is deep within the brain, and it's a very primitive organ. We share it with reptiles and many other of God's creatures. And it's made to sense danger. Not only is it made to sense danger, from an evolutionary standpoint, the amygdala was favored when it overestimated the risk. So better in an evolutionary sense to identify something as dangerous when in fact it wasn't, than to miss a danger and be eaten or killed, right, as a prey in an over evolutionary time. So it's designed to seek out danger. It is specifically not rational. And not only is it not rational, when it's activated, it steals the frontal lobe's ability to reason. The good news is, as we see on the left-hand side here, is the frontal lobe is able to override the amygdala. However, it's highly fatigable. It takes a lot of energy for our frontal lobe to override the amygdala. And the most that we can actively suppress our amygdala, depending on who we are and what training we've had, is about 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours. And certainly my workday, and I'm sure yours, lasts longer than 90 minutes to 2 hours. And not just our workday, but our entire day is much longer than that. And the frontal lobe is up against this wimpy amygdala. It's wimpy, it's the reptile brain, right? But it's always on. It's never off. And there's no way our frontal lobe can be always on. So this is setting us a difficult task from the beginning, right? So I want to put this in a real setting. So this is Lone Peak at Big Sky, Montana. This is where my family and I went to my extended family, our last vacation together before COVID hit. This was about 18 months ago. It was New Year's, 19 months ago. It was really nice. And what you're looking at here is where is the upper peak. Most of the skiing happens on the bottom of the mountain. So my 12, about to turn 13-year-old daughter at the time said, gosh, Dad, that peak looks really exciting. Will you take me up there? And Anna's been skiing her whole, or most of her life, I would say. So I said, well, let's do a couple good days of skiing down below. And she did. And I said, yeah, I'll take you up there. So I will tell you what looks like an exciting bit of mountain from down below is really terrifying the first time you get off the lift. And so we got off the lift and she looks down at what's in front of her. So what part of her brain is on? So it's the amygdala, right? Of course, instant fear mode. The thing is to go down, to pull off a feat that is technically a little bit more difficult than one you've previously pulled off. What do you need access to? It's not your amygdala, it's your frontal lobe. So one of the other disadvantages that she had is that being 12 to 13, her frontal lobe is not fully developed yet at that time. And so now I will say that she being a girl, that girls do develop their frontal lobes a little earlier than my male colleagues. So she had that going for her. But fortunately, I had not only been on that mountain before, I had a frontal lobe that into its 40s. So I thought, gosh, what do I need to do? I need to be the frontal lobe for Anna and coach her into using her frontal lobe to get down this mountain and to chill out her amygdala. So what did I do? So I said, Anna, you know how to do this. What do you think she said? Yeah, sure. I said, Anna, you have the right skis, you have the right equipment. I've taught you everything you need. The teachers have taught you everything. That didn't get through. So what did I do? I had to appeal to her frontal lobe in a very easy to access way. So I did the first turn for her. I said, watch, And I said, do you know how to do that turn? She said, yeah, I need to do that turn. And then she did it. I said, okay, I'm gonna do 2 turns. And I did the next 2 turns. I said, Anna, you know how to do those 2 turns? And she said, yeah, I do. Forget about the rest of the mountain. We're gonna focus on the task instead of the fear. And gradually she was able to pull out of her amygdala lobe, and she got into a really nice rhythm. Now, this is a big mountain. It took a long time to get down. So about 40 minutes into it, what happened, right? So her frontal lobe got tired, and she started to get sloppy. And fortunately, at that point, we were towards the bottom. She did a great job. We high-fived and called it a day, is what we did. But we really, unless we were there able to access her frontal lobe, she would have been stuck with fear, even though she had the technical skills she needed to do the mountain. So the question for us is, so we don't all have mountains, right? We're not always in a life-threatening situation. So we have to think about, first I'd ask, what are your mountains, right? And where do we encounter them in day-to-day life? So this is kind of a preliminary conclusion here, because we're going to go a little bit further with this frontal lobe and amygdala. But for now, our conclusions are your amygdala makes it difficult to access your frontal lobe and to think rationally in dangerous situations, real dangerous situations or perceived dangerous situations. And that's a very important piece. The second aspect is your frontal lobe can suppress your amygdala. And this ability can be improved with training. I had mentioned, depending on how much training and practice you have, that can get better. However, the frontal lobe does remain highly fatigable, and the amygdala is always on. So that's kind of conclusion number 1 for this frontal lobe amygdala play. But there's a really important second thing that the amygdala does. And this is less, I find, in dangerous situations and more in our day-to-day. So I don't spend most of my days confronted with life-threatening stress, thank God, right? Unless we're soldiers or otherwise. Just my normal day-to-day stress. What does all this have to do? Is the amygdala activated? So I want to go through an exercise. And again, this is going to be focused towards our clinicians, but it is highly relevant to all of us. And later in the presentation, I changed from my clinician role to my parent role, and you'll see how I kind of do the same exercise. But for right now, just roll with me with our clinicians. So we're doing a balancing act all the time. We're doing some balancing act. So why did we become clinicians? Is because we loved being with our patients, developing relations with them, helping them. So we love patient care. But we have to balance that, like it or not, with financial performance, right? We have to pay the nurses, keep the lights on, make sure everybody has health insurance. That's part of our duty as stewards of the people, who are working with and for us. So this is always a balance. And if you go to one way or the other, if you're all about finances, no one's going to want to see you as a patient or work for you in your clinic. And if you're all about patient care, that's a very wholesome place to be. And this happens, people go out of business. So that's something that, and then, then there's no mission if you're not there. So this is a very classic balancing point. It's a bit of a seesaw. You can see the figure in the middle. Gosh, if you get too far to one side or other side, you're going to be out of balance. Okay. So this is how healthcare was for a long time, and to a growing extent over the decades, and particularly in the last decade, there started being a new element added. And that's various sorts of quality metrics. Now, of course, this is so important, right? So we want to know that we have good immunization rates for our patients. We want to know that that we're recommending the appropriate cancer screenings and et cetera. So sure, yeah, this was a little bit honestly imposed on the industry, and maybe as it should have been. But it's another thing to pay attention to. It's another agenda during that day. So you end up in this place like, okay, gosh, I got to really focus on my patients. All right, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to see enough patients and not spend too much time with them so I can make the organization happy. I got my financial performance going. And wow, then I have to make sure my quality metrics are in line. Maybe I'll just stay late. I'm going to stay late so I can do all of these different things and balance them. And I'll just be at work from, about 6 in the morning till 10 at night. Okay, well, then what happens? Then your family relationships suffer. So it's not just these two different ends, it's these multiple competing priorities. And we're in a place where our amygdala is perceiving threat, because we're not going to succeed at every single one of these things every time. So another thing I talk to our clinicians with our quality metrics. So if you have 20, that would be very easy to have 20 different things you're supposed to do on every patient every day. If you get 18 of them 90% of the time, that's pretty good. But what is your amygdala going to see? Your amygdala is always on, particularly at the end of the day, and it's looking for threats. So what part of that day where you did 18 of the things right 90% of the time? If our amygdala is looking for threats, what conclusions will it make of our balancing act, which is destined to fail, right? So we're going to fail at the balancing act in the sense that we're not going to do everything right all the time, every time. So what the amygdala is going to tell us is that we're failures. So left to its own devices, our amygdala will assign us a negative self-worth, and it's a liar. It's a liar. And this is real tested neuroscience, and it's often hard to perceive when you're the one going through it. There's an excellent book by Jim Doty, who's a neurosurgeon, and is now he runs the Compassion Center at Stanford, and he wrote a book called Into the Magic Shop. The piece that he writes about in there that's relevant to this, he calls the DJ. So it's the DJ. I like to call it the sportscaster. It's like the play-by-play in your mind about how your day's going. So we're thinking about our day. We're, okay, I'm gonna make dinner, and now I have to make sure the kids get in bed, and now I have to. Those are the things that are in my mind because that's what's happening in my house while I'm giving this talk. So we're finishing all those things up. And there's this, and it's not so much the sportscaster because that's the play-by-play, but there's in our mind, it's the color commentator, right? Who is saying, "Oh, Yolga really screwed that up," and the meat tonight is a little bit overdone. Gosh, I don't know. That's the amygdala. It's the DJ, and the DJ is a liar because it's looking for threats. So that's like a bleak place, especially when you have a busy clinical practice, and all of a sudden we add something to it like COVID, especially when you have a busy family life and we add something to it like, God forbid, somebody's sick with a pretty significant illness, right? So when we're already stressed and then we add to it, we're not going to hit everything, and the amygdala is going to see us as a liar, is going to assign us a negative self-worth. So we can't stop there. There wouldn't be any hope. So there's some hope. So let's go to the hope. 3 behavioral techniques for promoting what we call the task positive or the frontal lobe driven response to stress rather than the risk response or amygdala driven neural network during stress. So how do we do that? And there's some real nuts and bolts to doing it. So I'm going to give you 3. There's a lot more than 3, but again, we're really skimming the surface tonight in the talk. The first one is the most powerful and the most important one, and you're going to be like, you're going to be very disappointed because here it is. Chilling the amygdala and keeping the frontal lobe in charge. We have to sleep enough. We have to get enough exercise and eat well. And at this point, when I'm speaking to clinicians or even my patients about this topic, they're like, how much are we paying for this visit, right? Is that what you have, right? Like that's, well, of course you have to sleep right, exercise, and eat well. Well, yes, we do. And doing that, so that frontal lobe's ability to be in charge, to be the one driving our choices and our behavior, is highly dependent on its ability to regenerate neurotransmitters that really only reliably happens during sleep. So if you're already not getting enough sleep, you're gonna take that 90 minutes, that 2 hours of frontal lobe that you have, and it's gonna go down. Exercise too is very important because one of the things I didn't show in my diagram, and I was trying to make it not too complicated, but the balance between the amygdala and the frontal lobe is highly influenced by our stress hormones. And so adrenaline. And exercise helps us maintain a favorable balance of those stress hormones. And then eating well as well promotes all of that. So that's, I won't say if you're not going to do that, it's not worth the other things, because it is. But it makes it substantially difficult. Ask any clinician who's gone through a residency sleep deprived, which we all do, and it's the worst part is not the kind of difficulty with missing sleep. The worst part is the coping mechanisms that it takes away from you. So getting enough sleep. Now, as a parent, I can tell you that can be a hard thing, right? So it's not always as easy as I'm making it sound. So the other thing is avoiding unnecessary stress. When you mention this to most people, they think, are you kidding? I'm not choosing any of my stress. My stress is choosing me. Well, that's both true and false. The number one stress that we all most of us at least voluntarily engaged is on the pictures right here. It's the news media, and particularly the news media through our smartphones and electronic media. And why is that true? So if you're, I was going to say a newspaper, if you're a news outlet in whatever media, and you want people to click on you or to watch you longer or pay attention to you, does it make sense from a marketing perspective to appeal to the rational thought, or does it make sense to appeal to our threat response? And the answer is decidedly the latter. So news outlets are going for our amygdala. And so if you are on your phone before bed, which you shouldn't be, by the way, but let's face it, many of us are. So you're on your phone and you're doing some surfing and you're like, okay, time to put it down to talk to my spouse and, maybe read a good book. But you're scrolling a little bit and it says 3 things the government doesn't want you to know, or, or whatever. Like, it's hard not to click on that because we are wired to seek for threats. And so we have to be very purposeful around avoiding some of those threats. And I am not advocating, by the way, that we be blissfully ignorant of current events, right? Quite the contrary, right? We need to be responsible citizens, particularly as Catholics, I believe. But it has to be very purposeful when we choose to pick it up and when we put it down. So avoiding unnecessary stresses of all type. Number 3. So it's a little bit unfair that I'm lumping all of mindfulness, meditation techniques, and etc. into one practice, because it's not. This can be a very useful and effective set of methods, not a single method, for addressing addressing our amygdala drive and how to maintain rational thought in a stressful environment. So. And this is true in Western traditions, in Eastern traditions, in secular traditions, where we are able to suppress the amygdala and our stress hormones. And the common thread through all those traditions is deep breathing. So by breathing, we lower our stress hormones, we lower our adrenaline, which makes it easier to suppress the amygdala, and it makes it easier to engage our frontal lobe. And there's many different ways of doing this. You can do, and the reason it works is because the neural patterns that we exercise are the ones that we get good at. So a short digression, the reason a violinist practices their piece over and over again is because not just because they remember it, but it becomes part of the neural network in their hands and in their mind, and they go to perform. And they could think about things like musicianship and the art of playing their violin. And a lot of it kind of plays itself because we've built a neural network. We've practiced it so many times. Likewise, if we're constantly looking at bad news on our phone, for example, we are practicing being stressed out, literally. So we are reinforcing those neural networks. And this is demonstrable at an anatomic level, functional level in our minds, that we reinforce those stress connections. Our amygdala gets bigger if we practice being stressed. Likewise, what most mindfulness and meditation looks to do is to practice being calm. And that's a fair way to practice. The challenge is, though, it can stop there. So let me give you an example. So one technique we've used with some success in our clinical practice at the University of Vermont in primary care is called a hand on the doorknob exercise, where you're going into a patient room and you can imagine, so you're a few patients behind, there might be some chaos in the waiting room, baby's crying because they got their shots, which is wonderful, but it's sad, So how do you put all that away and be present for the patient? So we practice putting our hand on the doorknob and taking a deep breath, saying everything's okay, I'm calm and available. And it can work. It can work beautifully, particularly if you've done it a lot, and you can make it easier to access that calm space in your mind. the challenge and the reason that I propose that we move on soon to the Christ-centered aspect of this is in a secular understanding of this. To some degree, that's where it stops. Like, that's our most powerful tool. Additionally, what a lot of my colleagues will tell me was, when I suggest, listen, when things are getting, forgive me, I'm going to stand up. I am a walking presenter. I walk all around when I teach and talk, and so I'm working on being good at Zoom. But you'll forgive me. I'm going to stand up here. So when I suggest to my colleagues that they take a moment to tell themselves everything okay, very commonly the response is everything isn't okay. Like, are you kidding? That I'm 3 patients behind. Everybody's upset with me that I'm not, able to spend as much time as they want. And why are you trying to tell me? So what I'm telling them to do sometimes is to lie to your frontal lobe. The frontal lobe can't be lied to. Well, it could be, but it's very rational. And if we try and trick it with a lie, it should call our bluff. It should call our bluff. So different practices of mindfulness meditation could be so important, but they can't be everything we do. So so this much of the presentation, if we were doing a half-day workshop, we would go through 5 or 6 or 3 or 4 different exercises of these different mindfulness meditations. And again, this is for time's sake, we're going to move through it. But this much of the presentation is what I give in different forms at different places. I want to move on from here to contemplate how we can take these practices, which are helpful, but move to what honestly is our most powerful, I don't say weapon, I guess it is a weapon, our most powerful weapon, our most important tool, I feel, is into combating the stress. And so this is a newer part for me. It's an exploration. So I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you. I will say, picking 3 scripture-based passages, once I really got some time to delve into this, it was like being taken to a toy store and say, like, you can only pick 3 toys, and like, I wanted the whole shelf. So again, we'll start. So let's go back to that hand on the doorknob comment. And let's think about the hand on the doorknob, and let's Christify that small phrase, because this to me illustrates what's different about a secular meditative practice and a Christ-centered practice. So our hands on the doorknob, we're about to have, you could change it from a clinical situation to a difficult conversation or whatever. Big deep breath. Dear Lord, things are chaotic right now, but may I be the hands and feet of Christ to this person who needs me at this moment. Amen. You go see the patient. So there's many things that are different about that prayer rather than meditation. But I would propose to you the most significant one is that in our Christian faith, it's not simply a practice where we're hoping or meditating on making things better. We're really fulfilling our call to relationship. We are called to relationship in Christ. And so that is what we're leaving on the table when we only look at the stress response in a secular way. So we're called to relationship in Christ. So what are some different ways we can look? So we can look at this. So we were looking at that example where we were looking at where it became less of a seesaw and more of a wheel, where do we focus on our patient or the financial performance or our quality performance, or do we try and make sure we get home to our families? All those different things. And one of the ways I often feel that way is, God, I can't do it all. I can't fix it all. I can't be it all. I actually had this moment parenting earlier today. Like, I can't do it. Something was breaking in the house and my kids needed emotional support. Like, I can't do it all. So what does Christ have to tell us about this? Well, so he's on the mountain preaching to the 5,000, and the disciples, they need to point out, and I've worked for bosses like this where you have to point out, like, hey, look, everybody's hungry. Like, we need to do something. And what does our Lord say? He says, well, you give them something to eat. And they replied, we can't feed all these people. We have to send them to town. And he says, what do you have? He says, 5 loaves and 2 fish. He says, fine, bring them to me. And then all were ate and filled. So what can we make of that in our amygdala world example. So there have been many times, again, in parenting, and I'll share a personal story if I may, where I'm not, particularly in my clinical practice, I'm not sure I'm serving God in the way I'm supposed to be. Largely, of all of the paperwork and administrative tasks and everything, like, Lord, is this really how you wanted me to serve you? And I remember, it was the Easter Triduum, and it was Holy Thursday, and I was watching our priest do the washing of the feet, and this thought came to mind, and I said, God, I'm not serving the world like you do. Like, what am I supposed to do? And I made this prayer. I'm going to give you what I have. But God, in return, and we're not supposed to play like this. Like, this is what I need in return. Like, it's a bargaining. That's But just give me a sign. I'm not always that smart, God. Give me a sign that I'm doing the right thing. And well, gosh, that Monday. So Easter came and went, and the Monday I'm back in the clinic, and the very first patient, lovely elderly lady, she's sitting up on the stool on our exam table, and I said, "What's wrong? What can I do for you?" And she's sitting there with her foot off. She said, "My feet hurt, and can you look at them?" And I'm sitting there, and I'm holding her feet in my hands. I'm kneeling down on the floor, and I'm spending all this time with her feet, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh! Like, what kind of sign? Like, how much less opaque of a sign could I possibly ask for?" And suddenly, like, it was kind of this idea that, yeah, this frustration that I was having, it's not, Christ didn't say it was going to be easy, right? But what he did say is, give me what you have. It calls to mind the parable of the talents, right? Whether you have 1 talent, 5 or 10, are you going to bury it in the ground? So honestly, on my worst days as a clinician, like, gosh, let me stop. I'll be a stay-at-home dad. Then I come home and I can't, then I can't hang it all together as a husband and father, right? So there's no place to run. So what do we have left to do but to give everything we have to God? And if we do that, and let God own the outcome, boy, isn't that a way of disengaging our amygdala? And I'd like to go through that in a little bit more detail. I'll flesh that out a little bit more. Let's go to a different scripture passage. It's hard to think of an overwhelmed human being without thinking of Mary and Martha, right? So as we all know, Jesus is visiting with Mary and Martha, and Martha's busy. And in Luke's account of this is very interesting. He doesn't say exactly what she's doing, or actually even that she's doing a lot. She's busy and worried. But we assume, in my mind, right, domestic tasks. Like, if I had a guest, like, I'm imagining the things that I would be doing to make that guest comfortable. And then and Mary's sitting listening to Jesus, and Martha, Jesus, what, tell Mary to help me. I have a lot going on here. I'm trying to be the host. He says, Martha, Martha, you're worried and distracted about many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. And contemplating on that gospel reading, and I've done this for a long time, it makes sense to me saying, okay, if I can be really present to patients like Christ would be, or to my children, or to my spouse, that should be enough. But in my rational brain, I get stuck there. I say, gosh, but is that enough? Like, if I'm present to my children, but I can't provide a home and an education and food and clothing for them, if I'm present to my patients, but I don't do a good job in making sure their cancer screening is up to date, it doesn't seem like that's enough. I've had a hard time making sense of that. So this series of events helped me understand this a lot better, and I'd like to share them with you. So I want to go back to our balancing act, where we're trying to balance and we're not going to work, right? And I was doing an exercise with some of our physician faculty on how we might reconstruct this. How can we build this anew? So instead of looking at this, so I show this to clinicians, they all say, that's right, that's how I feel. And to parents and to professionals in other fields. And that's how I feel. I feel overwhelmed all the time by competing priorities. How can we make this, instead of, yes, that's how I feel anxious, we could change it to be, gosh, that's a model that would make me feel calmer. And this is what we came up with. And this was an in the moment. So I'm not proposing this is the answer, but it's going to be a starting point for our next piece. So we started talking about, instead of living on that wheel, let's live in the middle. Let's not be chasing each thing. Let's sit in what matters most. And we decided in this particular exercise that our personal relationships matter most, and our work relationships, and that we want to build everything around that to support that. So then, yeah, we love the patients we're taking care of, and so we want to provide them quality care. And then we start to hang the other things around that. So financial performance is still important, but it's subordinate to the other needs. It's important because it's necessary to keep our doors open, to keep our lights on. Same thing with academic promotion and academic medicine is a big thing. It's, how can you move from assistant to associate to full professor, right? And for people who are really in the depths of taking care of patients, it seems like a distraction, but to the degree it supports our ability to fulfill our mission of patients and education, it can help letter writing for your students, and etc. So we came up with this idea of living at the center. Now, I love when we think we invent something and we haven't invented something at all. And so at the same time, about the same time we were developing this, I suspect many of you have heard Bishop Robert Barron speak. He's done a lot of fantastic work, and he has several fantastic pieces where he meditates on what it means to live to the center in Christ. And so, as I was going through this in my secular mind, I was going home and thinking, gosh, we're really missing something at the center here, and that's Christ. And then I heard Bishop Barron speak, and I'm going to do a terrible job of summarizing his points. I will summarize them only, and I strongly recommend. He's all over YouTube and at Word on Fire. But there's two images he uses, both from the medieval times, that are very poignant. One is his meditation on the rose windows. This is the rose window at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, which did survive the fire, apparently, thank God. And he talks about all the religious imagery and all the different characters and teachings we're supposed to learn from all around the window, but what's in the middle? The middle is Mary holding the Christ child, representing that that should be the center of our lives. He also talks about this image of the Wheel of Fortune, which is apparently also a medieval tradition, where it's showing a man grasping for power, rising up in power, and then ruling and having power, and then losing power, and then being without power, and then grasping at power again. It invokes this cycle of we're all looking to fill our hearts with the pleasures of the world, in this case power, and really says, get off the wheel, because in the center of that image is Christ. So the wheel is still there, but we don't have to be on the spokes. We could be at the center. So that was all. I feel it's all very powerful imagery. What does it have to do with the frontal lobe and the amygdala? Right. Let's go back to this thing we were talking about. Remember, what does the amygdala do? But it assigns us negative self-worth if left unchecked. And what do we know, though, if in that moment of negative self-worth, if we turn to Christ? So we're not going to achieve everything all day perfectly that we set out to do. Do we still have worth in Christ? Yes, because we're made in the image and likeness of God. And if we can grab onto that piece, then that neutralizes the amygdala's number one argument that we're failures. And that's its most powerful argument. And I'm not trying to make it sound easy. I think it's still a journey, and that's going to be the last scripture piece that I share. But to me, if we live our value and assign our value as being made in the image and likeness of God, and look at other people with that same value, all of a sudden it silences the amygdala, because we have worth. We don't have to worry about all these different things. And at the same time, when we silence our amygdala, what do? We make our frontal lobe more available to attend to all those different things I was outlining before. So the delicious irony is that in giving up and just saying, I have worth just because I have worth in God, we're actually more capable of carrying out the things that our amygdala was accusing of us of being so inadequate to address. But how do we get there? right? So it's one thing to say we're made in the image and likeness of God, and that's enough for me. I don't need further honors of the world. Like, that's really the pursuit of all religion, right? I'm not proposing that just by saying that we're going to get there. So thinking about that a lot. And, I ended, this was actually a very well-timed talk. We spent this last several Sundays in John chapter 6, looking at the John's bread of life narrative of Jesus. And I want to pick a few pieces from that. I mean, the whole chapter would be relevant. But if we look at what Christ tells us there, and this is just a little bit of it, I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. Okay. So what does that have to do? Hold on, I want to see. Okay, so what does that have to do? So talking about the Eucharist, right? And I wanted to include the manna here because we're talking about two different types of food. Obviously, the Eucharist is real food, it's bread, as manna was food that kept the Israelites going during the Exodus. But when we feast on the flesh of Christ, it's spiritual food. And to me, as I was contemplating, how do we live this Christ-centered life in a way where we can let go of all these other things that we're using to assign our value? How can we achieve that level of and at the same time, leave ourselves better off to do all those things, right? And reading this passage and hearing it in Mass the last several weeks, it led me right to the Eucharist, and not just the Eucharist, but all the sacraments of our faith that are meant to help us assign ourselves the value that God's assigned us, to make ourselves living in that center, living in Christ. So let's go back to our picture here. So grasping at balance causes imbalance, right? So what are all these things? So this is the family one. Okay, so when I'm thinking about my husband and father role, I'm thinking about my family's financial health. I'm thinking about cooking for the kids' clothes, their physical needs. Gosh, I got to get them to their soccer games and etc. In our house, it's violin lessons, which I use the violin at. We have to make sure we're doing all that. Gosh, what about their education? Let's make sure, are they doing okay in school? How are we going to? So all these different things. I'm going to suggest those things, just like we were saying, that's the manna in the desert. Those things aren't unimportant. They're very important. They're the piece of life, but they're not the spiritual food that can keep us from going. And if we create our self-image, not with our amygdala, but with the spiritual food that God gives us, we're not going to worry so much about, are we doing everything all the time, because it becomes less important and at the same time more attainable to be present for all these things. So that's a lot. And we've barely scratched the surface. But so I want to make some conclusions, and then I'm going to break a rule and I'm going to give an extra conclusion. And so these are the three conclusions. When you're doing a presentation, you start with your conclusions and then you work to them. And really, this is what I started out with. And this is where I hope we got. So left unchecked by the frontal lobe, the amygdala will identify threats, often mistakenly, and lead us to assign ourselves low self-worth. Sleep, avoiding unnecessary stressors like news, and meditation are helpful ways to improve our ability to control our amygdala and activate our frontal lobe. And then faced with overwhelming demands of the world, we can reach peace by handing over to God what we have and living Christ-centered lives through the sacraments. So those were the things that I had, but in doing this and in contemplating, going through the exercise of adding the Christocentric piece on to the other stuff that I've been spending years now learning, I couldn't help but not come to a different conclusion. And this is a conclusion I made after I went through the exercise. And it's really this: we've been talking about the frontal lobe and how we can use it to combat the amygdala. But honestly, I was thinking about this, and it is through our though our frontal lobe suppresses our amygdala. And indeed, Catholicism holds that rational thought, so using our reason, is a very important path to the truth. It's in giving our hearts to God that we are truly freed. So it's all about suppressing the amygdala with the frontal lobe, but in the end, it's giving away our hearts. And it's not just about the frontal lobe. And this really, this is the conclusion, and at the same time, it's the beginning. Because this almost, when to me, I'm finally getting to ask the right question. And so I'm hoping in time to do more exploration of this, but you've been very attentive. I'm happy to take some questions. Again, there's so much, even in the short time we have for questions, there's so many different directions we could take it. And I'm happy to hear what people have to say.